It's been in the back of my mind for quite a while, the whole climate change debate, environmental issues growing, pollution. So I've always felt very strongly about it.
It was a shocking discovery that rocked the entire palace. A cold, quiet morning that felt completely frozen in time. The freezing winter air around Windsor Castle hung heavy and still, while a weak sun threw pale shadows across the ancient stone walls. Over at Clarence House, Prince William had slipped in much earlier than usual, desperate for a quiet moment before his royal duties started. Usually those early morning hours were strictly reserved for private briefings, personal notes, and some needed solitude. His closest aides knew just how much the prince truly cherished these brief moments of peace. They offered a bit of order in a chaotic life that rarely allowed for quiet. But on this particular morning, his peace was shattered. Before he could even take a single sip of the hot tea waiting right beside his desk, an aide stepped inside with a look that signalled urgent, sensitive trouble. No rushing footsteps, no raised voices, just the heavy, undeniable tension of a staff member carrying the exact kind of news the royal family never wanted to hear. The aide quietly asked for a private word. Sensing the sheer gravity of the situation, William shut the folder on his desk and stood up straight. Just the day before, a routine maintenance check took place at Royal Lodge. With its ivy-covered walls and quiet tree-lined paths, the property had long been a peaceful escape hidden deep inside the Windsor estate. It had served for decades as the home of Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, a woman who knew all too well the extreme highs and cold lows of royal life. The sweep was supposed to be a simple check to make sure the building was structurally sound and fully updated with the latest security systems. Nobody expected anything unusual, but as the maintenance crew began clearing out a long-forgotten wing of the home, they stumbled upon a room that had been sealed off for decades, and inside they found something far beyond ordinary, dusty old keepsakes. Instead, workers uncovered a stash of boxes packed with private documents, audio tapes, and personal journals that triggered instant alarm bells for security. The messy handwriting varied wildly, and the dates stretched back across several decades. These secret boxes did not seem to belong to the Duchess, and they certainly did not match any official royal files logged by the palace over the years. As the aides broke the news to Prince William, a heavy silence fell over the office as though the very walls were listening in. He immediately demanded specific details. What exactly was found? Why were these documents so dangerous? Did the Duchess know they were hidden there? Most answers remained unclear, but the emerging details painted an incredibly worrying picture. Some of the files detailed secret meetings held right inside the palace during the ugliest years of conflict between the late Princess Diana and senior royal courtiers. Other papers contained highly personal thoughts allegedly written by outsiders who should never have been privy to such sensitive royal family secrets. Even more disturbing were written transcripts of private conversations between the young princes featuring childhood moments that no outsider should have ever been allowed to record. These were not just some misplaced files. They were explosive relics from the most painful and politically dangerous era in modern royal history. Prince William listened with a forced calm exterior, but the staff noticed a sudden shift, a tight clenching of his jaw and a cold stillness behind his eyes. It was the look of a man suddenly forced to confront painful memories he had spent decades trying to lock away. Memories of media chaos, toxic press intrusion, and the messy divorce of his parents. The palace staff kept explaining the details. The private stash had been hidden in a dusty corner room that had gone untouched for almost 20 years. A past guest had briefly used the area to store personal items before falling seriously ill, and the room had been locked up ever since. Had the Duchess ever actually set foot inside that room, investigators highly doubted it. It seemed the boxes were stashed there without her help, and likely without her ever knowing they existed. Across the estate, whispers of the shocking discovery began to spread quietly among top officials, with every rumour adding to the growing sense of dread. The Duchess had always been a highly controversial figure within the royal fold, warm, friendly, and incredibly generous, yet constantly dragged into scandal through bad luck, trusting the wrong people and intense personal struggles. Sure, she made mistakes, but never anything that suggested she had betrayed the crown. The horrifying thought that her private residence contained papers that could spark a massive international scandal felt utterly bizarre, yet deeply terrifying. By noon, the prince had cleared his entire schedule, locking himself in a secure briefing room with top aides and high-ranking security chiefs. The atmosphere inside was tense but highly focused. While the royal family had survived brutal scandals before, this specific crisis felt completely different. This was not a tabloid attack or some silly public blunder. It was an explosive ghost from their past returning to haunt them out of nowhere. William understood the delicate nature of the royal family's reputation better than anyone. The death of Queen Elizabeth closed an era defined by duty, silence, and intense quiet resilience. His father, King Charles, was steering the family through a new era of constant media scrutiny with zero room for error. The public, though still obsessed with royalty, had become highly critical of palace secrets. Now a bombshell finding that could rip open old wounds threatened to destroy the fragile peace they worked so hard to keep. As night began to fall, an urgent meeting was set up between the future king and top royal attorneys. The files discovered at Royal Lodge could not be brushed off as simple curiosities. They had to verify the documents traced their origins and uncover why they were hidden. Was someone secretly using Royal Lodge as a dumping ground? If that was true, why pick the Duchess's home knowing she had faced decades of intense press attention? Hours later, when his legal team finally left, William sat completely alone in the silence. Stepping up to the grand window, he stared outside, watching the cold winter light slowly die behind the towers of Windsor. The heavy burden of his future crown felt heavier than ever. He was not simply a grieving son who had lost his mother. He was the future king, solely responsible for safeguarding her legacy, protecting his family's honour and defending an institution older than Britain itself. Meanwhile, Sarah Ferguson got her first hint that something very serious was unfolding. A quiet, urgent message warned her that top palace officials had to discuss a shocking situation regarding her property. Recovering from her recent health battles, she had hoped to spend quiet days surrounded by family. Instead, she got the distinct feeling that her peace was about to be completely shattered. This crisis was moving far quicker than anyone could have predicted. Even though the true scale of the shock discovery remained unknown, one worrying detail was already crystal clear. Whatever secrets were uncovered inside Sarah Ferguson's home had the potential to deeply shake the British royal family, and this was just the opening act. The reaction from the Prince of Wales showed just how serious this was. Prince William had spent his whole life training to be calm, steady, and deeply reserved. Those who worked with him knew he almost never lost his temper. But the moment the palace archivists walked into the briefing room holding a stack of highly sensitive documents retrieved from Royal Lodge, an undeniable tension instantly settled over the prince. He sat up, his expression sharpening. He thanked them in a low voice, then gestured for the files to be placed before him. The first document he opened was a handwritten memo specifically mentioning Princess Diana. It was written by someone who had absolutely no official role in the royal household, meaning they never should have known the deeply private details spilled across the paper. These notes tracked events from the 1990s, written in a style that walked a thin line between private gossip and highly intrusive surveillance. While William read, his breathing became incredibly slow. He turned each page very carefully, though his stiff movements showed a quiet fury building up inside him. By the time he looked up, the room had gone completely silent. An aide asked if he wanted to pause, but he shook his head. He had to know everything. The next folder was even more devastating, containing written records of private talks between Princess Diana and top palace officials during a period of massive media pressure. These chat logs looked like rough summaries instead of official transcripts, implying that a third party was spying and collecting information through secret channels. William scanned only a couple of lines before slamming the file shut with surprising force. He let out a slow breath, his jaw tightening. The archivists continued. Deep inside the pile were files tracking the young princes from their school days to their private lives inside Kensington Palace, detailing the painful emotional struggles they faced after their parents split up. These were deeply personal details that never should have been put on paper, let alone kept in a private home outside of Crown control. William leaned forward with his fingers pressed together, digesting the massive fallout of this leak. This find was no longer just some historical curiosity. It pointed to something far more sinister. Decades ago, someone had actively documented the deepest vulnerabilities of the royal family. Was it for leverage, or maybe for power or some other dark motive? He quietly asked the security team exactly how these papers had been found. They explained that the secret room was hidden behind a door, swollen shut from years of damp air. Inside, boxes were piled haphazardly, as if hidden in a rush. Several items were wrapped in strange packaging that looked nothing like standard household goods. This only made the mystery deeper. Suddenly, an advisor asked the exact question William had been dreading. Could the Duchess of York have known what was hidden there? William answered very cautiously. He warned them that jumping to conclusions would only ruin their focus. No matter what Sarah Ferguson did or didn't know, she absolutely deserved a fair chance to speak before anyone made up their mind. Even so, a quiet, nagging worry began to creep deep into his mind. The Duchess had long dealt with money troubles, bad advisors, and people who exploited her trusting nature. Could one of those shady figures have hidden these items in her home? Had someone used her vulnerabilities as a personal shield? William stood up and walked slowly toward the window, a habit that always showed he needed quiet time to think. The dim winter light hit his face, exposing a rare emotion he normally kept hidden. A cold, quiet, yet terrifying anger. He wasn't mad at the Duchess or his staff, but at the fact that someone had exploited the most traumatic chapters of his childhood. Turning back around, his voice sounded calm but completely firm. He ordered that those secret files had to be locked down immediately. This investigation had to stay entirely quiet. No photocopies, no media leaks, and absolutely no public gossip. Protecting the crown required calm precision, not hysteria. Then a security guard dropped another bombshell. Some of the file dates matched up perfectly with moments of extreme tension between the royals and the press. The files hinted that hostile outsiders were trying to manipulate or spy on internal royal debates. Even though there was no active danger, the scary realization sent shivers through the room. Prince William immediately demanded a complete guest list of everyone who had visited Royal Lodge over those exact 20 years. It was going to be an incredibly long list, but he ordered the search to start immediately. This investigation had to be perfectly thorough. Meanwhile, whispers quickly spread among senior palace staff that a massive royal crisis had just broken out. No secrets were shared, but the heavy vibe was impossible to ignore. Entire royal departments went on high alert, and several historic archives were immediately locked down to the public. Late that afternoon, Sarah Ferguson got the official warning letter from the palace. She reacted instantly, demanding to speak directly with Prince William to show she had nothing to hide. Insiders who heard her call reported that she sounded absolutely terrified, but also deeply sincere. Prince William agreed to sit down with her, but only after reading every last document. He wanted to know the full truth before looking her in the eye. He wanted to show her respect, but his primary duty was protecting the reputation of the crown. As night fell and Windsor Castle went silent, William sat alone with the secret files. Page by page he read through painful chapters of royal history he had spent his life trying to bury. Some parts hurt, while others deeply shocked him. Every single page made him feel physically sick. This was definitely no accident, and it was certainly no innocent mistake. A deliberate operation had been run inside Royal Lodge decades ago. Now that these secrets had resurfaced, the entire royal family would have to face the ugly truths hidden inside those dusty boxes. As darkness fell, William was completely certain of one thing. This royal investigation was not going to stop with just reading old documents. Her past had suddenly resurfaced, and he refused to let it ruin their present. Now Sarah Ferguson finally breaks her silence. The Duchess of York was no stranger to public scandal and royal drama, but this urgent summons from the palace carried a heavy weight she had not felt in decades. She was relaxing in a quiet room at Royal Lodge when her phone buzzed, demanding an urgent face-to-face meeting. The second she read those words, a dark, sinking feeling took over her chest. Behind palace walls, very few situations demand the personal attention of a future king, and almost none arrive with this level of extreme urgency. Over the last few months, Fergie had been slowly recovering from medical treatments that required absolute peace and quiet. She had fully embraced this slower pace, finding comfort in books, cosy blankets, and her loyal dogs. Royal Lodge, with its massive lawns and peaceful historic charm, had truly become her private sanctuary. But the moment that message flashed on her screen, all that peace vanished. The grand house suddenly felt cold, haunted by some invisible dread. She picked her outfit with great care, choosing a dark coat and a simple scarf. No bright colours, no flashy accessories. This meeting demanded total gravity, humility, and absolute focus. Stepping out into the freezing afternoon air, she paused for a brief moment to catch her breath before getting into the waiting vehicle. As the car sped away from the Windsor estate, she stared blankly out the window at the bare winter trees passing by. She couldn't help but wonder what kind of emergency had triggered this royal crisis. Arriving at the palace, she was quickly guided down secluded hallways she knew by heart, though she had never walked them under such tense and alarming circumstances. The palace staff offered polite nods, but their faces were completely stone-faced. She could feel the thick, heavy anxiety hanging in the air like a dark velvet curtain. It instantly dragged her back to the years when the court was buzzing with gossip about her marriage, her financial struggles, and her worst public mistakes. Those old scars still hurt. An aide of Prince William opened the heavy door to a small parlour and quietly invited her to step inside. The room felt warm, glowing under soft lamps, with the walls covered in historic oil paintings of past kings and queens. The Duchess sat down nervously, folding her gloved hands as she waited. The quiet ticking of an old clock filled the silent space, counting down each second with painful accuracy. Then the door opened and Prince William stepped inside. He greeted his aunt politely, showing no warmth but also no anger, just total neutrality. It was that blank expression that truly terrified her. Looking closely at William, she could still spot the sweet boy she used to know who had now transformed into a serious, dutiful future monarch. But she also saw the fierce protector of the British crown, the absolute guardian of Princess Diana's legacy, and the leader of a royal family constantly defending themselves. He took a seat across from her, and the brief silence was incredibly tense. "Thank you for coming," he began, his tone quiet but incredibly serious. The Duchess nodded, her throat tightening. "Of course," she whispered. "I knew something was terribly wrong. Please tell me everything." William didn't yell. He didn't even lean forward with angry accusations. Instead, he spoke with deliberate care, explaining that a locked room at Royal Lodge had been opened during a routine maintenance sweep. Inside that space, staff discovered a pile of old boxes. The contents were not just personal clutter, but highly sensitive documents and audio tapes covering some of the most scandalous eras of modern royal history. Hearing this, the Duchess pressed a hand over her mouth, her pulse racing. She felt the ground shift beneath her feet as the horrifying truth began to sink in. A secret collection, something she had absolutely no knowledge of, had been sitting right inside her own residence. She stared at the prince with wide, terrified eyes. "I swear I didn't know. I had absolutely no idea those boxes were even in there." William watched her closely. He wasn't showing anger, but he was incredibly cautious. He demanded absolute honesty and complete transparency. The monarchy demanded it, and so did he. The Duchess leaned in, her voice shaking just a little bit. She explained that the room in question had remained completely locked for many years. At one point, her estate was constantly filled with helpers, busy organisers, assistants, and occasionally even dangerous opportunists. During her most chaotic years, she had constantly let random people drift in and out of her life. Some offered help, some offered advice, some offered friendship. But others, she now realised, had simply taken advantage of her fragile state for their own selfish gain. She faintly remembered that nearly 20 years ago, during a dark financial crisis, a former business associate had dropped off a few cardboard boxes. Back then, she just assumed they held childhood mementos belonging to her daughters or documents from her old charity projects. She never opened them, nor did she ever give them another thought. She had simply told a staff member to stash them in an empty, spare room. William listened quietly, his face unreadable. He wasn't naive. He knew his former aunt's life was historically chaotic and packed with shady characters, but he also believed she rarely did anything out of actual malice. But good intentions were only one part of the equation, and the consequences were massive. She spoke again, getting emotional. The thought that my own home was used for something improper completely horrifies me. Believe me, I would never hide something like this. Never. Her panic was clearly genuine, but good intentions alone could not solve this massive security crisis. William gently asked if she remembered any specific visitors or suspicious guests, or any strange deliveries from those years when the room was left unlocked. The Duchess tried desperately to remember, but decades of chaos had blurred all the details. Names drifted to mind, along with blurry faces and a few odd encounters that suddenly felt incredibly suspicious. "I was far too trusting back then," she confessed quietly. "I always have been." William leaned back in his chair. That was the best explanation she could offer for the disaster. Then she brought up something that visibly shook him. She was terrified for her daughters, worried they would be dragged into the public speculation and judged for her mistakes. She deeply feared that yet another major scandal linked to her would ruin their reputations and damage their growing public roles. William's tough expression softened, if only for a brief second. He promised that her daughters would be shielded from any unfair media exposure. No final decisions would be made until the full review was complete. Once the meeting wrapped up, the Duchess stood up slowly, whispering a quiet thank you, before walking out. As she headed down the long hallway, the royal portraits seemed to stare back at her in silence. To her, the ancient tapestries and heavy stone walls seemed to hold the crushing weight of centuries of royal secrets, and she had somehow stumbled right into one of the darkest. Outside, the bitter winter air hit her face. She took a long breath, desperately holding back her tears. Whatever dark secrets had been uncovered inside Royal Lodge were certainly not her doing, but they had now become her heavy responsibility. She knew this scandal would unfold even further, and she felt a sinking heart knowing the absolute worst revelations were still ahead. Inside the palace walls, Prince William returned directly to the investigation room. There were still dusty boxes to examine, deep mysteries to unravel, and that persistent nagging feeling that this was far more than some forgotten archive. It felt much closer to a buried, calculated scheme, and their next discovery would prove it. The final box held a truly shocking revelation. Night had completely settled over Windsor Castle by the time that last container from Royal Lodge was wheeled into the highly secure review suite. The long corridors were dead silent, illuminated only by dim golden sconces, the sort that cast long, eerie shadows across the cold stone walls like watchful silhouettes. Most of the palace employees had already gone home for the night, completely unaware that the single most explosive discovery of this entire investigation was still waiting sealed inside dusty, aging cardboard. The royal archivists moved with extreme care. They wore white gloves not just to protect the fragile papers, but because they felt instinctively that whatever lay inside demanded absolute reverence. This particular box appeared quite different from all the others. The label was barely legible, written in ink so faded it seemed older than the box. The dry, cracked tape suggested it had not been opened in decades. One senior archivist, a veteran who had handled the royal family's most sensitive documents for nearly 30 years, hesitated for a long moment before finally slicing through the old tape. He later admitted that it felt exactly like standing on the edge of a high cliff, knowing that one step forward would expose a dark reality no one was prepared to face. As they finally pried the box open, a musty, stale scent escaped, bringing with it the chilling, unmistakable aura of long-forgotten secrets. Resting inside was a cluttered layer of loose papers, quickly scribbled notes, half-written memos, and old envelopes bearing no addresses whatsoever. But right beneath that messy stack lay something far more sinister. It was a smaller, tightly sealed container marked only with a few mysterious initials. No dates and absolutely no explanation. The entire room fell, dead silent. The archivist lifted the small container with great care and opened it. What he discovered inside made him gasp. They were photographs, but definitely not ordinary family pictures. These snapshots had been captured in highly restricted areas where cameras were strictly banned, private drawing rooms and inner courtyard spaces that were completely closed to the general public. These were secure corridors inside Kensington Palace, where only royal family members and trusted staff could go. The grainy images were shot from bizarre, awkward angles, clearly taken in secret. While a few were quite blurry, many were shockingly clear. The tense archivist slowly examined the first few developed pictures. He immediately signalled a security officer to contact Prince William right away. The prince arrived less than 20 minutes later, dressed not for a formal event, but out of sheer urgency. His face remained carefully composed, but the stiff tension in his movements gave away his deep anxiety and dread. Quietly, the lead archivist explained the shocking nature of their discovery. William asked to see absolutely everything. They lowered the lights to protect the images from any glare. The very first photo was placed on the table. William froze and stared. The picture captured him during his university years walking down a quiet corridor, completely unaware that someone was spying on him. He studied it closely, his brows furrowing deep. Then came the next image, a private family gathering in the secluded gardens of Kensington Palace. He remembered that exact day. It was one of those rare weekend visits when both he and Prince Harry were home together shortly after they tragically lost their mother. They thought they were totally safe from prying eyes. But the third picture shifted the room's entire mood. It was Princess Diana herself. She wasn't at a public event or some official royal engagement, but captured in an incredibly raw, vulnerable moment inside Kensington Palace. She looked exhausted, lost in deep thought, totally oblivious to the invasion of her privacy. Even decades down the road, looking at this print felt like a massive violation. Prince William's breath caught for just a split second. Another photo showed a key royal advisor entering a private meeting room, holding a folder marked as strictly confidential. The camera angle made it clear the spy was never in the room, but had snapped the photo through a cracked door or from a dark, shadowed corner. The implications were absolutely devastating. An insider had been actively spying on the royal family, someone with high-level access, someone incredibly quiet who knew exactly where the security blind spots were located, and someone who, for motives they still had not figured out, chose to conceal this incriminating evidence right inside the home of the Duchess of York. William pressed both hands flat onto the table as he leaned closer to examine the photos, his jaw clenching tighter with every passing second. The archivist stood in total silence, knowing this was no longer just a historical discovery. This represented a breach of trust so incredibly deep it shook the very foundations of royal privacy. Slowly he picked up one photograph and carefully studied its edges. The images came from a camera that was neither cheap nor professional. It was something small, highly portable, and designed to snap quick pictures without drawing any attention. The dates on the back were handwritten. The earliest was from the late 1990s and the latest from the early 2000s. This was not a single incident, it was a clear pattern. Finally, William looked up. His voice, dangerously quiet and cold as steel, carried absolute authority. "Who else has seen these?" the lead archivist answered him with complete honesty. "Just 2 people in this room, no one else." William nodded slowly. "They must remain heavily secured. No one outside this small circle can ever know." He never raised his voice. He did not pace the floor, but deep inside him painful resentments and old memories began to stir like dust suddenly shaken from a room locked away for decades. He remembered the painful struggles of his mother with media intrusion, her deep fear of being watched, and her war against forces in the shadows. He recalled the chaos, the conspiracies, and the whispers. The horrifying realization that someone inside their inner circle had secretly recorded her without her knowledge was a devastating blow he felt physically. The shock deepened further as the archivists pulled out one last envelope hidden at the very bottom of the dusty box. Hidden inside were detailed handwritten notes mapping out specific palace rooms, detailing exactly where security cameras were mounted, and even more alarmingly, where the blind spots existed. William froze. This was no simple curiosity, this was full infiltration. Whoever wrote these notes had deep insider knowledge only possible through close proximity. Maybe it was a staff member, an advisor, or someone pretending to be harmless. And though years had passed, the security breach still carried major implications today. The archivist then revealed one final chilling detail. The smaller container holding the actual photographs was sealed far more carefully than the other materials. It suggested deliberate concealment rather than just accidental storage, and Prince William's face hardened. There was zero anger in his expression, only a chilling, quiet clarity. Someone had used Sarah Ferguson's private home as a hiding place for surveillance evidence, perhaps because her residence, unlike official royal palace buildings, was far less likely to undergo systematic security sweeps. Perhaps because her past public controversies made her the perfect unintentional shield, or maybe the person responsible truly believed no one would ever look there. As the meeting wrapped up, Prince William issued quiet, firm orders. The sensitive photographs would be placed in the highest security archive, and their origin would be investigated discreetly and thoroughly. Every name, every regular visitor, and every staff member connected to Royal Lodge during those crucial years would be reviewed. Outside, the night had grown even darker. Windsor's grounds were silent, but inside a quiet storm had begun. Prince William walked slowly toward his private chamber, the massive weight of those photographs pressing heavily on him. They weren't just simple relics of an intrusion, they were dark symbols of how deeply the past could reach into the present. And for the very first time he understood that this wasn't merely an unsettling discovery. This was a direct threat requiring damage control strategy and a future king's ultimate decision. By the very next morning the entire palace was stirring with a quiet urgency. The corridors hummed with a heavily restrained energy, the kind that signalled a massive internal crisis, without a single word spoken aloud. Every single footstep seemed to echo more sharply, every door click resonating as if it were amplified by the heavy tension holding the building together. Prince William arrived early for their first major strategy meeting. He had barely slept as those troubling images from the night before heavily haunted him. They clung to his thoughts like shadows that refused to lift, each photograph serving as a stark reminder of how vulnerable the family had once been. It wasn't just the invasion itself that deeply unsettled him, but the shocking realization that this threat had actually been hidden in plain sight for many years. It was a quiet danger, almost forgotten, yet still capable of shaking the monarchy he would one day lead. This meeting room had been chosen for its absolute privacy. It had thick walls, heavy secure doors, and absolutely no windows. Around the table sat 3 of his most trusted advisors, a senior intelligence liaison, the palace's chief security officer, and the private secretary. Each brought a different expertise, but they all shared the same heavy apprehension. William began the meeting with a simple, direct statement. We must determine how deep this goes, and we must do it quietly. Naturally, the security chief was the first to speak. He explained that the chosen location was not accidental. Royal Lodge was a softer target than the palace, with fewer security sweeps, fewer restrictions on storage, and a long history of visitors, and a prominent resident who, through absolutely no fault of her own, had lived through periods marked by severe financial strain and complicated associations. It was a hiding place chosen not out of loyalty, but obscurity. The intelligence liaison then presented a brief analysis. Those photographs clearly indicated access to both staff areas and private quarters. The notes also showed deep understanding of palace security patterns. Whoever created them operated with extensive insider knowledge. The burning question was whether this individual had acted entirely alone or as part of something much larger. The private secretary shifted the conversation to public risk. If these photos ever surfaced, even without context, the press would immediately erupt into a wild frenzy. The media narrative would spiral completely out of control. Conspiracy theorists would resurrect every painful rumour surrounding the late Princess Diana, burying the royal monarchy once again beneath endless speculation. Prince William listened carefully, then asked a quiet question that made the entire room fall silent. Could the person responsible actually still be around? The senior intelligence liaison admitted that possibility. The timeline was incredibly long, but patterns of infiltration often involved individuals who blended in very easily. Constant staff turnover, changing roles, and new contractors over the years made it difficult to rule anyone out. In fact, some individuals might still hold positions with direct access to sensitive areas. William clasped his hands steady but noticeably tense. Then we cannot allow even a single hint of this beyond these very walls. We handle this quietly, methodically, and we do not let panic become our advisor. He then requested a complete reconstruction of movements during the years those photographs were likely taken. He wanted a detailed list of anyone with access to the rooms in question, including staff records, contractor logs, and visitor entries. Everyone, no matter how seemingly insignificant, would be checked. The palace would conduct this review under the guise of routine security modernization. Absolutely no one outside this tight inner circle would know the real reason. When the meeting ended, Prince William stepped out into a quiet courtyard. The winter air was crisp, and the sky stretched in a pale blue arc above him. For a moment he allowed himself to breathe deeply, as though the cold might steady him. He desperately needed clarity and needed perspective. Most of all, he needed to protect the royal family from another devastating cycle of intrusion. Later that morning, he arrived at Clarence House to meet his father. King Charles had been briefly briefed, but he still awaited a full explanation. When Prince William entered, the king was standing near the window, hands clasped behind his back, the soft sunlight outlining him with a gentle glow. He listened entirely without interruption as his son explained the photographs, the detailed surveillance notes, and the shocking discovery at Royal Lodge. When William finished speaking, the king turned slowly, his expression incredibly grave. King Charles had spent an entire lifetime navigating massive storms of public scrutiny, but this was completely different. This wasn't outside pressure, it was an internal breach, a betrayal of close proximity. He placed a supportive hand on William's shoulder. You will carry the heavy crown one day. What you do with this crisis now will shape how you lead in the future. William absorbed the heavy words. There was no accusation in them, no fear, only a sober acknowledgement of the moment's weight. They discussed potential routes forward. Transparency was far too risky and silence was too dangerous. A careful middle path had to be charted, with Charles advising caution. Find the truth quietly, protect the royal family, and when the time comes to speak of it, carefully choose your moment. Not every truth must be shouted. Some must be handled like glass. William nodded. He got it. The British monarchy did not survive on drama, but on pure, unwavering stability. Later that night, William gathered his closest team. Their strategy was finally coming together. Those shocking photographs would stay locked away under top classification, while a thorough audit of staff and visitors started immediately. Any person whose name popped up repeatedly during the timeline of the security breach would be flagged for much closer scrutiny. He also made a choice that shocked some, but felt completely unavoidable to him. He ordered that Sarah Ferguson be briefed on the fresh findings. She deserved to know how serious this scandal had actually become. Despite her highly complicated past with the royal family, she had every right to understand why her private home had been targeted like this. The private secretary quickly set up a quiet follow-up meeting. When the Duchess arrived, William welcomed her with his usual measured composure, but his eyes carried a far heavier truth this time around. He explained that those discovered items were not just misplaced paperwork, but proof of a massive long-term spying operation. He made it clear she was not under any suspicion. The Duchess clutched her hand to her chest, looking visibly shaken by the news. "My home," she whispered, absolutely stunned. "They used my own house for this." William nodded gently as she wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. She apologized once more, not because she was guilty, but from the sheer grief of being dragged into a conspiracy far larger and darker than she ever imagined. William reassured her that the palace would take full charge of the investigation. She would not face this storm alone. As she turned to leave, she paused right at the doorway. "Please protect the boys," she said softly. "Your mother would want that." Those emotional words hung heavily over him. He carried them back to the palace like a solemn private vow. Later that night, William retreated to his private quarters. He stood entirely alone for a long time, staring at a framed photograph of his late mother. Princess Diana was smiling and radiant, completely unaware of the camera lens that captured her decades ago. A sudden wave of memories hit him, her joyful laughter, her strength, and her constant fear of being watched. Then he made his ultimate decision. He was determined not to let royal history repeat itself. The coming days would be incredibly quiet, precise, and tightly controlled. No leaks, no whispers, and absolutely no careless mistakes. He was prepared to follow this dark trail wherever it might lead, and when he eventually became king, the royal family would be far better protected than ever before. For now his mission was absolutely clear. The dark shadows had been exposed, and he would face them head on. This shocking discovery at Royal Lodge changed everything. For Prince William, this was a massive turning point, a harsh lesson in vigilance, and a grim reminder that the Crown's greatest threats often grow in silence. To hear the next chapter of this royal investigation, subscribe now and follow along as this massive scandal unfolds.